Hello, and welcome to the Money Metaphors Podcast with your host, Jason Coddington. Jason, good to be with you again. I'm excited about today's show. I admit I have a personal interest here, but I'm excited what you've got on the table for the show today.
Yeah, we're excited. I think, our industry, financial planning, or investment, there's so much jargon. There's, mutual funds, ETFs, variable annuities, SMAs. It just are just tons of jargon. And then there's ticker symbols. You have to remember it's kind of crazy, but it can be confusing to people, but if you're in the industry, it's clear. But one thing that I enjoy, but I don't understand, is I enjoy beer, and
Amen.
So, but I just never, so today's podcast, I'm going to be learning along the way. But they have their own. I don't know about you, but Coors Original is kind of where it started for me, and then over the years, some adaptations, and then there's so many different brews out there, and then you learn to appreciate the artisanal part of brew making, and so today is exciting because we have with us a brewmaster from Magosh Brewing here in Kingsburg, California, which is literally, it's a pitching wedge for me. I could walk out my office and hit it and land it at his front door. So it's we like that. Josh has a little bit of a background, interesting enough, not only in beer making, but he does have a finance background. So it'll make it nice. And so what we hope to do today, accomplish today, is we're going to learn a little bit, a lot, hopefully, about beer. What's an IPA? What's a DBA? What's a porter? What's a Pilsner, lager, ale, hoppy, not hoppy, sours, all that good stuff. And along the way, we'll sprinkle in some finance so that when you're looking at a mutual fund or an asset allocation, exchange traded fund, you'll have some confidence and some wherewithal. And so if nothing else, so hopefully you learn a little bit about investing today and a lot about beer. So,
well, that sounds like a fine podcast to me, Jason. I'm looking forward to listening.
Yeah. And wait, I don't know if the mic's going to pick this up. This is like one, I don't know if you've been to I love going to baseball parks. So when I go, one of my favorite things to do is when you walk out on the field and you see the green grass. There's just a visual that's just amazing. And then in a basketball court, there's just a sound of the squeakiness. I love that sound. I played basketball, so I just love that sound. And then I don't know if it's going to work, but here's a nice other sound. And that's popping the top, right? That's
yes. I got Josh excited.
Yeah. So if you're watching this or listening to this, hope you're not driving. So don't do it if you're driving. But pop the top on a cold one and listen to what we have to say about learning about beer and go from there. So I'm going to introduce Josh. Josh, why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into this, and then we'll transition into some other activities. So.
Yeah, for sure. Like you said, I have a background in finance. Right out of college, I started working at Prudential as actually in their call center as a registered rep, helping people with 401k, 403b, 457s, and IRAs. That was back in Dubuque, Iowa. And shortly after starting that job, I got married to my lovely wife, Signe. And she's from Kingsburg, where we're all located now. When we moved out here, I'd always been into craft beer. Decided, try to fill up some of my free time because I didn't have many friends yet. I was pretty green out here in California. Decided to fill up some time with trying to make some homebrew. I was working for AIG at the time as a financial advisor, and one weekend went out and bought a kit and tried to make it in the kitchen, and it turned out terrible. It was the worst beer I ever had, which actually ended up being a good thing because being a craft beer enthusiast already, kind of realized that there's guys out here making really killer beer. So there's got to be a couple tricks to it, just like in finance. There's a couple things you got to know before you get started. And so I just went down the rabbit hole and researched everything, listened to every podcast, watched every YouTube video I could find, ended up buying actual like brewery textbooks from like Davis University and some of the other ones around, and just did the deep dive and figured out how exactly do you go from making terrible homebrew in the kitchen to making truly commercial quality beer. Around 2018, we decided we'd had about 6 years of homebrew experience and made beer for a couple of weddings, and everybody was like, "This stuff is better than most of the stuff we're getting at our local brew pub. You guys should really open something up." Um, uh, and decided it was time to jump in with both feet and build out a brewery and open up our doors. Took a couple years, but in 2023 we finally opened up our tap room, and the brewery you see behind me started bringing our beer to the masses.
Yeah. Well, right behind you, that's where the magic happens, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So,
It is.
yeah. Yeah. Well, so it sounds like, this one of my favorite books is Great by Choice by Jim Collins, and he has this phrase he uses, bullets before bombs, and his logic there is, if you're sighting in something, and back in the day, if you had a warship, before all the technology they had today, you want to shoot a musket because it takes less powder to sight in rather than just going all in. So it sounds like you had 6 years of musket before you went cannonball with the brewery. So that's exciting. Good deal.
Yeah, for sure. 6 years before we started the process of, writing the business plan and getting things open, and ultimately ended up being closer to 11 years by the time the doors were open. So there's a lot of
Yeah.
time to hone in the craft.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah, it doesn't happen overnight, although
No,
it
it does
just,
not.
yeah.
COVID didn't help either.
Right. No, it didn't help
Yeah.
much. Although I will say this, one byproduct of COVID is that everybody now knows how to use a QR code.
Yeah,
So,
that's helpful.
yeah. So, all right. So good stuff there. So let's talk about ingredients, just the basics, some fundamentals. So, I like wine, as you know. Wine's pretty easy because it's got one ingredient.
Yep.
So beer's a little bit different. So talk to me a little bit about what are we starting with beer? I mean, this might be elementary for some people, but we're going to also have some elementary stock and bond element to this conversation. So let's start with the ingredients, if you will, of beer, and we'll talk about the ingredients of a mutual fund and an ETF here in a few minutes.
For sure. Just like you mentioned with bonds and ETFs, I mean, there's so many different variations. Same thing in beer. I mean, anybody that's even paid attention in the beer aisle seen there's hundreds to choose from. They're all a little bit different, but most of them will boil down to water, which is our number one ingredient. I know, big shocker, right? Water, barley, hops, and yeast. Those are the four essential ingredients in beer making.
All right. So and of course, like wine, a little bit less for beer, but time, right? Time's an element of it, right?
Oh
You get
yeah,
those ingredients. Yeah. So
time is the most costly element for sure.
yeah. So right, for especially if you're impatient, like
Yeah,
myself.
yeah,
So okay. So so we've got the ingredients. Now, if you look and so how does that work? So you just throw it in a vat and hope it works, or do you have what's the process with all that? Tell us a little bit about that.
yeah. There's a couple different stages to the process. Most brewers will divide it up between the hot side of the process and the cold side of the process. On the hot side, we start with hot water. Um, uh, that is heated to a very specific temperature, usually between 145 and 155. That temperature can be adjusted based on how you want the mouthfeel of the finished beer to come across. If you match hotter, the mouthfeel will be more robust. If you mash lower, the mouthfeel will be much drier. And so, uh, we start by collecting our water, and then we'll mill our grain. There's a couple other steps in there, but essentially start with the water, mill the grain, and then we throw our milled grain into the water, make sure it gets all mixed up really good. It's very similar to like making oatmeal that's just a little bit too watery. Uh, and we'll just let that sit at its mash rest temperature for typically about an hour. Once the hour's up, we'll do a test to make sure that all of the complex carbohydrates in the grain have been enzymatically converted into simpler sugars that yeast can eat and digest and turn into alcohol and CO2. That's the main reason for the mash. You're starting with a starchy grain. You want to break that starch down into fermentable sugars. Once we've passed our conversion test, then we'll start to collect our wort. Wort is beer that just isn't quite beer yet. So we'll drain the mash off. At the same time, we'll sprinkle hot water over the top of the grain bed, and we're essentially trying to rinse all of the sugars that would have otherwise been left behind out of the mash. We do that until we've collected our boil volume. We brew 7 barrels of beer here. 1 barrel equals 31 gallons, and we typically split that into 2 separate boils. So we're looking for about 135 gallons on each kettle of pre-boil wort. From there, we heat up, start boiling, ramp up from it's usually about 168 degrees coming out of the mash tun. We'll ramp that up from 168 to 212 and get a boil going. Once the boil's going, we start to add our first batch of hops. The first batch of hops is specifically for bittering. And we want those bittering hops to boil for 1 hour. Towards the end of the beer, depending on the style, we'll add some more hops for flavor and for aroma. And from there, once the boil's done, it takes an hour. Once that's done, we start to run off from the kettles into our fermenters, which is what you see behind me. And like Jason said earlier, that really is where the magic happens. Brew Day is all about making a liquid that yeast are going to be just very happy with. So once they go into here, once we're cooled off to fermentation temperature, we'll add our yeast and basically sit back and let them make the beer. We do some testing and maybe make some additions along the way, but really it's the yeast that make the beer, not the brewer. Typically about a day after we've pitched our yeast, we start to see some activity in the tank. We start to see some CO2 blowing off. There's a lot of movement inside. The yeast are going to work, doing their thing. It usually takes about 3 weeks before they're done, and we have finished beer at the end.
Look at that. Complex. I mean, simple ingredients, but the process can be complex. See, and I learned something, it's like with wine. I mean, you need 2 ingredients to make alcohol. You need sugar and you need yeast to make alcohol. Yep. And I always was concerned, curious how in the world we get that from, grain, but the mashing the water process, the 145 to 155 does that. So yeah, cool. That's interesting. Well, so the corollary here, the metaphor, if we will, because this is Money Metaphors podcast, to that process with beer making and the ingredients is we're just going to talk about two different types of investments out there, ETFs and mutual funds. An exchange traded fund. Well, let's talk with mutual funds first. So think of a mutual fund as just, we'll use in this particular case, if you're watching those vats that are behind Josh, think of a mutual fund as a basket of stocks, and there's a bunch of ingredients to go in there. Well, those ingredients are individual stocks, and they will consist of, multiple, styles. So, and just like, Josh has different grains, different hops, where he buys the hops, those kinds of things, you have different stocks as well, different styles. Mutual fund can also be bonds. And so it can be high quality bonds or low quality bonds. But quite simply, I mean, we're a little elementary here, but the point of it is that then you have if you have an active mutual fund, then you have a brewmaster, you have someone like Josh, relative to beer is, picking the stocks and the allocation and, making tactical strategies with that. And so the nice thing the advantage of mutual funds is, if you were to go buy, if you just go get some barley on its own or some just hops on its own and bite into it, might not be so good. But using the process, with beer, it works out, and it turns into something, as you say, you talked about, magical. Same thing with stocks and bonds. If you just maybe buy an individual stock, that might work for you, but you're all invested in one thing. The nice thing about mutual funds is that you buy a stock, you buy a bond, you have diversification inside of that. And so if one of your stocks happens to go down, well, let's say you have in a mutual fund, you can have up to 100 stocks, or you can have more than that, quite honestly. But let's say you have 100, you have a 1 in 100 chance of losing your principal, as opposed to 100% chance if you're just in one stock. So that's the advantage of a mutual fund. An exchange traded fund, we'll just kind of keep it really simple. It acts like a mutual fund. There's diversification in there. The major difference is, in these two is how they trade. A mutual fund can be bought and sold at the open of the market. And then it's sold at the end of the market day. Exchange traded funds can be bought and sold throughout the market day. There's some capital gain and some tax implications there. We won't get into that. That's for a later podcast, but there are some similarities. So if you're ever sitting out there and like, what's a mutual fund? What's an exchange traded fund? Think of it as, it's a diversification tool for your investment to reduce risk and help you as an individual investor have access to multiple types of stocks really easy. So, and just like, I'm not making beer in my garage, so I can just, again, go across the street from my office here and go see Josh. And so that's nice. And so with the mutual fund, you can just go and pick it and buy it at an exchange traded fund, same thing. It's packaged up for you and you can do it. So let's transition a little bit, Josh, because people are more excited about beer than they are stocks, I'm sure, or mutual funds or investing for that matter. Okay, here's my question. I get confused by this. I know what an IPA is, but again, you got to walk me through this whole thing because Coors Banquet is it's the let's just say I started there. That's my base, and then you start adding things like, oh, would you like an IPA? Would you like a double IPA? Would you like a hazy? Would you like an IPA? Would you like a Pilsner? Would you like a lager? And you kind of sit there and you're just like, I give up. So. And one of my favorite beers is from Texas, Shiner Bock. Like, what's a Bock? So I mean, I don't know what I like it, and that's kind of where it ends. And I know what I like and don't like. So one thing for me is, you can see here I got a porter here, one of your porters. This is our dark matter, right? Porter. Yep. So let's start with that because I'm on the spectrum. I like them dark, like a porter or a Guinness, or like this, like a Guinness, and I like them light, like you guys have a Mexican beer, as they call it. and Ay Caramba, which is one of my favorites. So, but nothing in the middle. I don't like fruit on my beer, and I don't like it sour. So
Fair enough.
yeah, help us out, help our listeners out with lagers, pilsners, bocks, all that kind of stuff. And maybe if you happen to know a reference where people can come, and if they want to do deep dive, can go check out. Other than stopping by your place and visiting it and just testing it live, where can they go and check that out for
Yeah,
more
for
information?
sure. I mean, one of the best resources out there on styles is craftbeer.com. You can type in any style that you want and you'll get a brief description of it. Um, but as far as style goes, I'll break that question up into two parts. There's type, right? And then there's style, which is a little bit different. Uh, you have two main types of beer. There's a couple more, but the two, like broadly speaking, there's two main types. The beer Jason has, the beer you have, Jason, is it's an ale, and the style is robust porter, right? The beer I have right now, this is a Hefeweizen. It's also an ale. Style is Hefeweizen, right? Now, what makes an ale versus, say, a lager? Um, it really comes down to the type of yeast that's used. So, uh, ale yeast is a yeast that's been bred over the hundreds and hundreds of years that brewers have been making beer to ferment a little bit warmer. It likes to be around 68 degrees plus or minus. And the yeast will actually sit up on top of the beer while it's fermenting and kind of drop down through and stir the beer up, get a whole bunch of exposure to all of the sugar in that wort, right? So ales are top fermented, warm fermented beers that typically have a little bit, you're going to find they have a little bit more um, fruity ester to them. You're going to find that they have a bigger mouthfeel, so they're going to be a little bit more robust. Um, and you're going to find that um, they're typically just quite a bit more flavorful than their counterpart, which would be lagers. Now, lager is also talking not about a type of beer, but about a type of yeast. Lager yeast, in contrast to ale yeast, likes to ferment pretty cool. It wants to be down around 50 degrees. Sometimes you can go as low as 45 degrees. And that yeast, over the hundreds of years that brewers have been making beer, has been bred to actually sit down on the bottom of the beer. And instead of dropping down through the beer, it'll float up to the top. Same
Hmm.
thing, stir that beer up, make sure that it's getting plenty of contact with all of the fermentable sugars in the beer. And because it ferments at a lower temperature, it actually ferments a lot longer. So ales typically take about 3 weeks. Lagers, if you're doing it right, I mean, it's not uncommon to sit on a lager for 2 months before fermentation is
Wow.
complete.
Wow.
Yeah. So because you sit on that yeast for so much longer, and because it ferments a little bit cooler, the lager yeast will ferment quite a bit cleaner. I mean, think about it like working out in a hot gym versus a gym where the AC's blasting and it's almost impossible to break a sweat, right? If we sweat, we stink. If yeast are fermenting at a warm temperature, I don't think they stink, but they throw off some more fruity aroma, and there's just more byproduct, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
lagers, you're going to find a much cleaner, crisper, typically a lighter beer with a drier mouthfeel. Ales, different yeast, fermenting a little bit warmer. It's going to be a little bit fruitier. There's going to just be a little bit more going on in there.
So, I mean, you have your own. So, what's an example? What's a commercial example of a lager and an ale? So people just have a point of reference. So,
I mean, you've brought it up a couple of times. Coors Banquet, that's a lager,
okay.
you know, or any of the big quote unquote macro beers. beers that people say, hey, that beer tastes like water, those are all lagers. Your Shiner
Yeah.
Bock, that's a lager.
Okay.
Yeah. Ales, anytime you see an A at the end of a beer description, like you brought up IPAs, pale ales, um, uh, anything along those lines, those are typically going to be ales, right? Uh, a lot of times they don't say ale in the name. It's maybe misleading, um, but like my hef or your porter that you're working on over there, those are both ales as well. And it just comes down to yeast selection that makes the big difference.
Okay. So your porter is blonde and mine's, brunette. My beer's brunette, so
Yeah,
to speak. So
yeah.
what's the change in color then if it's the same style? I
Sure.
mean,
It's the same type, not the same style,
same
right?
style. There you
So
go. See, I've already messed
yeah,
up.
yeah. So no, that's cool.
I'm gonna get better as I
So
drink these porter.
so when it comes to the style, now we're really talking about recipe formulation,
Okay.
much less the yeast selection. So for say a porter, we're going to start with our base malt, which is just malted two-row barley. Really a lot going on there. If you just did a 100% malted two-row barley beer, it'd be typically crystal clear and macro beer colored, right? It would
Yeah.
be just yellow, and so or straw-like, right? Uh, we can add different types of malted barley. There's some other grains that we use too, but barley's the big one, such as caramel malts. So if we're talking about a red ale, I might add some different caramel malts into it. And those are grains that have actually been thrown through a kiln after the malting process is done, and they're heated up and the sugar inside of that grain is allowed to caramelize, right? And typically caramel malts will add anywhere from a little bit of a red hue to the beer. So if we're using a lightly carameled malt, start thinking like 805, which is a blonde ale. It's a little bit darker than it's got a little bit more red color to it than the, say, Coors Banquet. Um, if we're moving up the scale to say like something like an amber ale, we might use a little bit more heavily caramelized malt, um, and that's going to add a little bit more red hue on top of that uh, copper or straw base, and and with that color comes some additional flavor, right? Caramel malt, it's in the name. It adds a caramely flavor to the beer.
Got it.
For your porter, I used a black Prince and a roasted barley and a chocolate malt. These are all malts that the maltster has taken and roasted to the point where uh, just a little bit will turn that beer black, right?
Okay.
And
Okay.
so there's I mean probably 1,000 plus different types of malts out there, and all of those are little levers that we can pull to make changes in a beer, sometimes small, sometimes big. The other thing that we're going to consider in recipe formulation are our hops. Just like there's thousands of different types of grape varietals, there's thousands of different types of hop varieties, and they come from all over the world. Uh, just like with wine, hops grown in Europe are maybe the same variety. They're going to taste completely different, do something totally different in the beer than the same variety grown in, say, the Willamette Valley of Oregon.
Wow. Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, there's just so much that goes into it. So let me ask you. So, well, two questions. Um, I want to stay on style and type, right? So Pilsner. Is that what category is that fit in?
Most pilsners are going to be they're going to be a lager. Although
Okay.
right now we're seeing a bit um, of a stylistic change, especially in U.S. based craft brewers. Uh, s- a lot of guys are starting to make like pseudo lagers. So instead of waiting around for all the time uh, for that beer to ferment, they'll use a ale yeast that's been bred to just be super clean and call it a pilsner. You might be getting a pilsner that's an ale, but classically speaking, a pilsner a is going to be a lager. Uh, Pilsner is also referring to a type of malt, right? So you may have noticed on a can of Miller Lite it says Pilsner, right?
Hmm.
Versus a can of Bud Light, it does not say Pilsner. That's because Pilsner is is a malt that is typically the lightest in color that's available to us. Um, it's it's going to have more of a like just the essence of the crust from a piece of bread versus versus the like actual slice of bread itself, which
Oh,
is what
okay,
you
got
get
yeah.
from a two-row base malt. So
Okay.
Pilsner, you got to have Pilsner malt, and it
Got it.
should be a lager, although not all of them are.
There's those variations, right? Just like
Yeah,
investing, there's variation. Okay, so one last thing, and then I'll kind of transition a little bit about, um, some mutual funds and large cap, small cap, and explain what that means. But real quick, um, okay, so some people, and I was one of these that, well, man, the darker the beer, the heavier the alcohol content, and Guinness. Um, proves out that it's I think Guinness, I could be wrong on the calorie content, but it might be it's right there with Coors Light, um and its alcohol content's not high. So what would I'm gonna guess it has to do something with the amount of sugar or malt to get the alcohol content up. What real quickly, what drives that,
yeah,
alcohol
for
content?
sure. So, I mean, that question goes back to recipe formulation. When I'm writing a recipe, the first thing I like to look at is where do I want this to hit as far as ABV goes. I mean, we pick the style, right? We pick the type, and then where do I want this to land for ABV? And just like in financial planning, you kind of start with the end in mind, right? Where do I want to be when I retire? Where do I want this beer to be um, when it's ready to serve? And so if it's going to be like say a 6.5% beer versus say a 4.5% beer, I know that I need to basically add more sugar, add more fermentable sugar into that wort. So that sugar comes from our grain. A higher ABV beer is typically, and there are exceptions always, but a higher ABV beer is brewed with a larger amount of grain in the mash versus a lower ABV beer is a lower amount of grain in the mash. So
So which is that
for
yeast sugar equation?
exactly, yep,
Nice. Okay,
yeah.
see,
So
still learning. Okay.
yeah, we can make a 3.5% beer that's dark as midnight, right? But it's just
There you
it's
go.
just the amount of base malt that we start with that
That's what
really is going to determine.
you should do that, because most people, they call it stealth. And then
Yeah,
see, people would think it would be like, oh man, it's, well, one, because it's dark, and then two, oh, that guy's drinking, man, he's drinking like 5 or 6 of those 3%,
yeah,
but they don't know it's 3%. So anyway, whatever, just joking around. Anyway, so that's cool. So begin, yeah, that's nice. The begin with the end in mind is important. I think that's also true with investing. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But at the end of the day, when you walk into a brewery, you're not probably assessing, oh, what are my objectives for today?
Yeah.
but you probably,
We all know what the objectives are when you walk in a brewery, right?
yeah, and good time,
Yeah, we're gonna drink
right?
some beer.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. So, but you're not probably doing that but with investing or financial planning, you've got to do that. And so, we'll reiterate the importance of having your objective when you walk in. But when you look at your plan and when you look at building your financial plan, where are you trying to go? A lot of people do it backwards. They buy the investment thinking, oh well, it did well last year or whatever. It's in the news, and they buy a mutual fund or exchange traded fund, and largely because it's up, but they have no idea why. And we always want to advise that people do that as part of a plan, so like you were trying to target, a style or an ABV target. Clients should be doing that as well for a target. What are they doing? What's their risk? What's their time frame for the money? What does that look like? So all kinds of considerations. One thing that, you brought up style, and, I just want to hit this real quick. So to tie in the investing part of it, because there's so many styles, as you well know, and so many beers. And I think at the end of the day, you just want, if I'm coming there, I'm not thinking about all this. I just want to enjoy my time with my friends, have a nice cold beer, which, by the way, I've got to have it cold. So some people have different preferences there. But it comes down to what is this thing that people talk about, large capital. You have a microbrew, a macro brew. So we know what macro brew is. You guys would probably consider I don't know. You guys consider a microbrew? I mean, because you're based on your size.
Microbrewery.
So, and I'm sure it has to do about your volume, how much you produce. So, I want to run real quick through something that people hear when they invest, and it's about capitalization. So, what does that mean? I invest in a large cap stock. What does that mean? Or I invest in small caps or micro caps. And so, I want to just bring that up, and then we'll transition into some more fun beer conversation. Like if you're looking for let's start with large cap, because that's the one. These are going to be the most common names, right? So this is a 10 billion plus market valuation. Like what is that? Okay, people like market valuation. All you have to do is take how many number of shares are issued for that stock, and you multiply it times the stock price, and that gives you your stock valuation. So large cap, you could argue mega cap. These are 10 billion plus. So this is your Amazons, your Apples, your Walmarts. These are big players. Then we go from 1 billion to 10 billion in market capitalization. That's we call that mid cap, and that's Dunkin' Donuts would be a good example. Columbia, the clothing company, the ones that you see a lot of. Luke Combs, the singer, wears a lot of Columbia. Where. But yeah, 1 billion to 10 billion cap, and then small cap. These are going to be, the one that kind of pops up here is Red Robin. So if you've gone to a Red Robin restaurant, and of course I have, and I enjoy it. And one thing about Red Robin, I think they still do, is they have bottomless fries. So there's a plug for Red Robin, but nonetheless, that's a small cap, is under $1 billion. And then of course, micro caps would be under 500 million. So, or even less. So, I mean, why does all that matter? Because, again, when you're investing, the composition of your portfolio, the larger company stocks, they've been around longer. They have larger balance sheets typically. They have more revenue. They have not always have they been around. I mean, Apple hasn't been around as long as some of the other mid-cap size companies. But the point of that is that, if you're a larger company stock, you tend to have what we call less bounce or less volatility, just because of the sheer size of them. And so, when you're looking at a mutual fund portfolio, you're trying to say, or if someone's trying to promote one to you, or you're trying to buy in and say, oh, this is a large cap, you'll at least know what that means. It's one of your bigger players. And so, we can do a whole podcast on, stock capitalization, but just so that's kind of the tie-in between when you're looking at beer, what do I want? What I feel like today, I'm feeling like a porter. Maybe I'm feeling like something a little bit lighter, crisper. And then if you're a portfolio, what's the time frame for my investments? If it's long-term, Am I willing to take some risk? What don't I have in my portfolio? What I want to have, then you go through the large cap, the capitalization. So good stuff. All right. So back to beer. One of the things we've talked about, the ales, the ambers, the pilsners, how do you one of the things we talk about when we meet with our clients, and I would say everybody should do if they're investing, is they should, and this from your background in finance, they should measure their investment performance to a benchmark or to something so that they know they have a correlation of how they should be doing. So if you don't have a financial plan, that's first and foremost. If you have a financial plan, you should compare each year, how are you on track to, for your goals. In absence of a financial plan, if you have an investment, let's say it's large company stocks, you should probably want to compare how you're doing to the S&P 500, just to see, are you doing better or worse than the S&P 500, which is the 500 largest companies in the United States. If you're not, and you're paying someone to manage that for you, then maybe, it doesn't make sense to keep, keep the position you have and just buy the S&P 500 in an index fund, which I'll talk about a little bit later. Tell me a little bit about, all that being said, how do you monitor quality? What are your benchmarks? How do you know, hey, you mentioned your first beer what you made out at home was just terrible. How are you measuring quality? What are the things you're looking for before you put that, you're ready to put that in, in one of those big, those big mystery machines that behind you that make all the magic, and then ultimately before you put it in a can?
Yeah, great question. I wish we had a tool like Morningstar or something like that where we could just say, hey, how'd this do against the S&P 500? Unfortunately, beer is a little bit more
Subjective.
subjective, exactly. So we start with sensory. Once beer is ready to be served, you take a glass, you look at it, you smell it, you taste it, you take notes on it, and then we do have a few tools that are a little less automated than a little bit more tricky to figure out if we're in the zone or not. I like to refer back to the BJCP style guidelines.
What is that stuff?
It's the Beer Judge Certification Program.
Okay, got it.
BJCP.
Okay.
Yeah, and that organization basically outlines competition style guidelines for beer really across the world. There's a couple other organizations that we reference, such as World Beer Cup, but their main job is to take a beer that's in a competition setting and judge it against what the style should be. And so they've done a really great job of defining styles, of defining like where you should be with ABV, how hoppy should it be, what kind of flavors and aromas should be present in something like a Bock beer, right? And they put all of that information out. It's available through their websites and plenty of other places as well. Craftbeer.com has the BJCP descriptions on there. And so you look at what should this be versus what have I just made, and is it close? Another good way to do that is to take a well-known commercial example of a style. So, like for instance, you've got a robust porter sitting next to you. A really great commercial example of a robust porter, other than ours, obviously, is Black Butte from Deschutes. It's a great beer.
Good stuff. Like that. Like the commercial.
Yeah, and if you look at the BJCP guidelines, they'll mention Black Butte by name. Like if you're trying to make a robust porter, it should taste like this, you know. And so it's a good way to calibrate what we're shooting for, and it's a good way to judge internally against what we have on our hands. You can go a little bit further, which is something I like to do, and actually enter beer into competitions. You'll put that beer in front of a trained judge, and actually a panel of judges, and they'll send you notes back on, what you need to adjust if you're really trying to hit a profile for a certain type of beer or for a certain style.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's cool. I mean, and I think, and I like that, you got to take a risk and you make it and you sit it out there and say, hey, what do you think? Is it good or is it not? And then you have like we use in our industry, you have a benchmark to follow. You can,
Exactly.
so that's cool. That's cool. Yeah, you mentioned, I think what's interesting, the parallel there to finance, I think what's interesting, you mentioned you have a judge. And so a lot of people have, assets that they've accumulated over the years. They have a 401k, they have an IRA, they have things. And oftentimes people say, "Oh, Jason, would you just review this and let me know how I stand?" And we're happy to do that. And in that case, we're acting like a judge. But some of the things we're looking for is, number one is if someone just says, "Well, I just want to see how well I'm doing, I'm getting the most return. Am I making the most money I possibly can?" I mean, that's really not the question we should be asking. I mean, the question we should be asking, just as when, someone comes in, everybody has different preferences. As my wife, we visit your place. She likes the sours. I'm not a sour beer guy. So if I'm asking to judge it, you have me drink the sour beer, I'd be like, yeah, it's not my thing. And that doesn't mean it's bad. It just means my preference.
Yeah.
Same thing
People
with
always apologize when they're like, "Can I try it?" And they're like, "Ah, it's not for me. I'm so sorry. I don't like this." I'm like, you know what? It's fine. You don't like it, but they love it. So
yeah.
not every beer is for every person, you know?
Yeah, and that's why no portfolios. That's why I think our business, working with an advisor, that's the difference. I mean, yes, you can have, kind of boilerplate investments, and that's fine. But at the end of the day, you really need to be looking at what is your portfolio? What is it designed to do for you? And not, and for you means, when am I going to retire? Is it for college education? What does it look like? Is it hitting those objectives? And then what's the sleep well at night quotient? If you're staying up or not, staying up, losing sleep because the market's too volatile for you, then maybe your portfolio is a little out of alignment, and that needs to be quote unquote judged or rebalanced. And then you start looking at, okay, what kind of mutual funds, what kind of exchange traded funds inside, and what kind of bonds, if you will, need to be added to your portfolio to make, to make those adjustments. Just similarly to you, that what you're doing in beer. So that's the similarity. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm never going to say that I could make beer or be a brewmaster. Largely because I don't have the patience. You would think with liking wine, I would have patience because that stuff lasts. That's in bottle and barrel for years. But
I don't have the patience to make wine.
we could go on probably all day. We'll probably have another conversation about that. But let's talk about real quick. Help me understand this mystery with these glasses. Okay, because I have this thing. I think I kind of told you about it. Like wine is, if you're drinking a champagne, it's like a real, slender glass, real narrow. If you're drinking wine, if it's Cabernet, it's a bold wine, like a Petite Sirah. It's going to have a big glass, big bold, to, maybe take the air out or, give it some air, let it air out a little bit. Let it breathe, so to speak. And then, my wife and I, we were in Italy, and we had espresso, and it's like this bold, intense coffee, experience, and it's in a small petite cup. So,
Yeah.
I'm enamored with the glassware. Tell me a little bit about that with beer. Not that it matters,
Yeah.
but
It
we've got
does.
this
For sure it does.
goblet looking thing here, and we got this, I don't know, this well, it looks like me with pants on, this thing. What is that? What are our different glasses meaning?
Yeah, so the little one, that's a 10-ounce tulip. Um, that's what we serve. Typically, our higher ABV glasses or higher ABV beers in. At our brewery, there's not a ton of rhyme or reason on our glassware choice. other than the size, right? So if it's a super high ABV beer, we kind of want to put our foot on the brake a little bit while people are drinking, and make sure that we're not over serving. That's why the smaller glass. Um, but when it comes to glassware overall, you notice both of those glasses are belled towards the top. What we're doing is trying to focus the aroma in the beer. So when you go and smell it, it just kind of helps concentrate that aroma. Um, so you can uh, just get a good whiff, basically, right? There's there's a lot of different glass geometries out there. I'm sure you've seen like a huge a 1 or 2 liter Stein that might be like an Oktoberfest style glass.
Right. Yeah.
It's gonna have like real thick glass, right? That glass helps to give a little bit more um, a thermal load to the beer, so it doesn't cool down quite as much. And that glass is so you can drink a ton of beer quick, right? You'll see oftentimes like a Kolsch or a Pilsner or a wheat beer come in a long, skinny glass. That glass, you're trying to have a large column of beer, but you may not want to serve a huge amount. That glass is really designed uh, to encourage head retention and and uh, and allow you to like see that big pile of head that you might see on a wheat beer just like sit and stick around. Some of them, like I said, are domed, some of them straight walled. That has more to do with the aroma that goes into a beer. A Pilsner, while I think they smell great, the aroma is not as big a factor as like say a hef that might have a bunch of like banana and clove and a little bit of citrus in the nose. That we want to have that bell shape at the top to focus those aromas and increase the drinking experience overall. Um, so different types of beer get different glasses. Uh, this one is just kind of it's a standard craft beer glass. It's appropriate for most styles. It's long, narrow, and it's belled at the top to help focus aroma and for the beers that it matters. Um, and it helps encourage a little bit of head retention as well. That's why we went with that one for, that's why we went with that one overall.
Yeah. Crazy containers. I mean, you
Yeah.
got, and I think on a hot, we live in Central Valley, it's 100+ degrees Fahrenheit here. No humidity like the East Coast there, Bill, but no humidity, but definitely hot. And it's nice to walk into an air conditioned room, and it's even better to, enjoy it with a nice, cool glass of beer. Josh, where do you serve your beer at? What temperature?
I keep our cool box a little bit on the cooler side. Most beer should be served around 40 degrees. I keep ours at 36 degrees. Um, I just find that shelf life is a little bit better at a cooler temp, and that's my main focus in our cold box is to increase shelf life. But our beer warms up in the glass quite quickly. Uh, for anybody that's had a warm beer versus a cold beer, it tastes very different. And so I serve it as cold as we can get it, and then most of the time people allow it to warm up just a little bit as they're sipping on it. And so I like 36. Most guys like 40, but that's just me.
Well, I'll tell you one pet peeve I have. You go to a Major League Baseball game, and you get one of the big commercial, Modelo, Cerveza, Corona, Bud, pick your poison, right? Coors. The point I'm trying to make is that I hate when they serve. I'd rather have two smaller beers and have them be cold than one big one that I can. And the joke everybody tells me is like, well, Jason, you're just drinking fast enough. But I mean, that's just for me. That's a preference. Like, I mean, you go to a concert and you're sitting there and you just want to, heck, I just want to enjoy it, a nice glass while I listen to whoever, or bought not glass, but a can. And I get why they serve cans at concerts and sporting events. I mean, this is a little, there's some risk assessment they've done there. But yeah,
For sure.
I don't get the big can thing. It's never, but hey, everybody's different. So I guess it's just me. I don't drink it fast enough. But if it's cold, I will drink it fast. So that's just a thing with me. But and I'm sure everybody has their own preferences. I think, Raul, just kind of wrap up. Josh, there's been so much to learn. We could probably do another one of these. And we've weaved in finance a little bit. We've talked about the how you drink it, or what it's served, the temperature which it's served, the glass type, the hops, the fermentation, whether the yeast is at the comes in at the top or at the bottom. Is it a lager? Is it an ale? I think there's just a lot to learn. We could probably spend hours on this, but I will say this as we wrap up. I thank you for being here today. And if you're out there and you just want to enjoy, hopefully today you learned something. And when you're sipping on a Pilsner or an ale or a lager, you might remember, hey, you might be able to impress your buddies and say, or friends and say, hey, this is what an ale is. And maybe they don't care. just being together and having, spending time together. And that's what's important. Appreciate those that you're around. Enjoy time together, and do it over a pint, if you will, and enjoy time. But just know that there's a lot that goes into the process, and I would say that's the parallel with financial planning, is whether it's mutual funds, exchange traded funds, large company stocks, high quality bonds, long term bonds, even real alternatives. As a term that's thrown out there. What matters most is the objective, and that you have goals, you have objectives, and that you have a someone that you can bounce ideas off and guide you along the way. And so when you have that quote unquote sour beer that you don't like, if you're like me, you can switch it out, just like you can switch different positions out of your portfolio, and you'll be doing it based on your preference, your portfolio. And so thank you for sharing today. I think it's been great.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, we'll do this again. And
For sure.
yeah, I think it's great. And if you're around the Kingsburg area, if you're happen to be listening to this, stop by and see Josh. Why don't you real quick, Josh, tell about your name, because you got a neat story. So
it's Magosh. Like, oh my gosh, right? But I started this business with my brother-in-law. His name's Magnus. My name's Josh, and we're trying to think of a name for, I don't know, it seems like years, but one day Magnus's wife Carmen goes, "How about Magosh? Like Magnus and Josh, mash up your names." Normally I hate that stuff. I think it's so cheesy, but I was like, that one's good, and it's got like a good craft beer ring to it, and there's a lot of fun stuff we could do with Magosh, right? So it's stuck.
yes. Oh my gosh, that's cool.
Yeah, exactly. You get it.
Yeah, that's right. No, so no, that's good. I mean, I yeah, appreciate you guys. Love that you're helping the community out. If you're listening to this podcast and you're in the Kingsburg area, it's Central California, swing on by there and enjoy it. What, a 36-degree temperature, cold beer, and you can choose. They even have seltzers now, so that's kind of a unique thing. So give them a shot. They're great people, and love their community, and they have great product. So thanks for taking
Thanks,
the time
Jason.
today. Yeah. And and again, if you're just confused about your investing, or if you just want to get started, probably the best thing to do, you can give us a call, 559-897-0040. You can visit our website at www.coddingtonwealthadvisors.com. And Josh mentioned there's like for tasting, there's like flow charts, and there's diagrams of what and guidelines on what should be, We have tons of resources on there, flowcharts, checklists for about over 35 financial topics. Go ahead and check those out. And if you're really interested and just need a review, if you want to judge your portfolio, like someone like Josh had his beer judged, you can click on the right-hand corner, schedule a brief 15-minute phone call, and we'll give you some guidance on whatever topics you might want to listen to, or want to discuss.
Yeah, no, this is great. And I love it when you can mix the financial metaphors in with something that people can relate to, and it demystifies really finance in a lot of ways, because you did a nice job weaving them in. I just have two really quick things. First of all, I'm really, really thirsty now because I grew up on 100+ degree weather in Texas. So I drank a lot of really cold beer, and 36-degree beer right now, Josh, sounds like really, really good to me. One question you didn't get into, and I just got to ask this because it's a myth, or a local a legend, or maybe it's true. India Pale Ale. The reason it got its name was because that ale is higher in hops, therefore travels better, because beer was shipped from Britain to India. Ergo, India Pale Ale. Is that true?
That's a great question and a huge topic. There's a great book on it called, get this, IPA by Mitch Steele. The long and short of it is they were making IPAs before they started going to India. They were just hoppy pale ales, right? The Brits invented the pale ale style. There was one brewery in particular called Burton-on-Trent that started throwing extra hops into the barrels while they were aging them, and decided, hey, that's good. That's pretty delicious. They kind of, by more of a process of elimination, figured out that beer traveled better. They would load up ships with all sorts of different beer, and by the time they got to India, most of them were not their best. But the India Pale Ales, well, the hoppy pale ales at the time,
right.
They found that those ones survived the trip a little bit better, but they'd already been around for a while. So it is a bit of a chicken or egg question, but there is, just like any good myth, there's a little bit of truth to it, but there's more to the story.
All right. There's more to this podcast too. For those of you who are listening for the first time and you're not a subscriber, you can just simply follow the podcast, become a subscriber. That way, every time Josh drops a new beer, or Jason drops a new podcast, you'll be notified and you can give it a listen. And we would appreciate it if you like it. Tell people about it. Word of mouth promotion is a very welcome tool, and we would thank you for it. Jason, this has been a really fun and informative podcast. Thank you so much. And do reach out to Jason. If you just are curious and you want your portfolio reviewed, do it. It doesn't obligate you to Jason, but it could give you a good introduction to Jason, and may make you think you'd like to have a relationship with him financially, as a matter of fact. Until the next episode, I'm Bill Tucker, thanking you again for taking the time to listen today. On behalf of Jason and everybody at Coddington Wealth, thanks. And I'm going to remind you that you can go out today and make today a great day or not. It is your choice, and it is yours to make. Thanks so much for listening. Until next time.
Thank you for listening to Money Metaphors, exploring financial concepts through stories and analogies. Visit our website at www.coddingtonwealthadvisors.com or give us a call at 559-897-0040. Don't forget to click the follow button to be notified when new episodes become available. Jason Coddington is a registered representative with and securities offered through LPL Financial, member FINRA SIPC. The opinions voiced in this podcast are for general information only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual. To determine which strategies or investments may be suitable for you, consult the appropriate qualified professional prior to making a decision. The featured guests and their company are not affiliated with or endorsed by LPL Financial or Coddington Wealth Advisors. Individual tax or legal matters should be discussed with your tax or legal professional. Economic forecasts set forth may not develop as predicted, and there can be no guarantee that strategies promoted will be successful. All performance referenced is historical and is no guarantee of future results. All indices are unmanaged and may not be invested into directly. There is no assurance that the techniques and strategies discussed are suitable for all investors or will yield positive outcomes. The purchase of certain securities may be required to affect some of the strategies. Investing involves risks, including possible loss of principal.